This 1 year of probation, if you will, and now they are accepted and eligible to become actual professed members of the Third Order. So I want to explain a little bit to you about that. What is the Third Order? Why do we have it? What's the importance of that? Some of you may know this type of language of the church, the First Order and the Second Order and the Third Order, and that sort of thing. Priests belong to the First Order of the church because of their ordination. And then you have monks and brothers and nuns and sisters. Some are in convents, some are in monasteries, some are in parishes, some are in novitiates, all these kind of ecclesiastical words. Basically, if you find a person that is very contemplative and he's wearing a habit, or she is wearing a habit, that makes him a monk and then makes her a nun, and they belong to the Second Order. So I don't have that much experience with monks, but at least when I was in the United States district, there was a monastery, a full-fledged traditional monastery operating there in New Mexico, and it still is. And that's the work of Father Cyprian, and I knew that work when he had 2 or 3 monks. Now he's got somewhere between 30 and 50, I think. That's a glorious thing, There used to be a time when the church had monasteries everywhere, just one town had 5 monasteries or something like that. Or they named the towns after monasteries. Munich, I think that's a German city that means monk. That's just how things were. That's Christendom. Well, 1,000 years have passed, or at least 500 years have passed. And the monasteries have been taken over by Protestant sects, or they just have sold themselves to other organizations because they didn't have enough vocations to operate, and so forth. So we've seen the disappearance of the monks, but sometimes you'll see a monastery that still exists for whatever reason, and that was in the United States, and that was beautiful. That was one occasion where I actually met men who belonged to the Second Order, because they were religious brothers who did a lot of contemplation, and they were usually in silence, and they had all kinds of penance that they had to do. They had to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to chant matins, and then after an hour and a half of that, they had they could go back to bed or study, and then they wake up again at 5:30 or 6 in order to have lauds, all these kind of things. What I would call a very rigorous schedule to make a Second Order religious. And then that happens also with the nuns, the females. I know of a Carmelite order of nuns, and that's the Second Order, again for the same reason, because they're so contemplative, and they have their meditation not just 1 time a day, but 4 times a day. We priests, we meditate 1 time a day in the morning for almost a half an hour, and we belong to the First Order. And then you have these holy religious, these Carmelite nuns, they get together 4 times a day for meditation for at least a half an hour. Just a month or 2 ago, we priests were on retreat for a whole month. And in the retreat, you meditate at least 4 times a day. And the retreat preacher told us, well, gentlemen, for 1 month, you're going to be like Carmelites. And you have to get together and meditate 4 times a day at least. And when we were getting close to the end of the retreat, he said, and now your Carmelite vocation is almost finished, and you can go back to meditating only once a day, and let the nuns do the rest of the meditating for you. Kind of unfair, but at least it was honest. And that's what the Carmelites do. And when I knew them, they were below 10 vocations, at least in the United States, and now they're up and over 20. Well, that's hard to do, because that's a very demanding life, but I'm sure it's a very consoling and glorious life. I think after they become nuns, professed nuns, well, let's say they wear a wedding dress on the day of their profession to show that they are really being married to their groom, their bridegroom on that day, who is our divine Lord. And they lie prostrate on the floor and all these kind of things. And then they say goodbye to their parents who come to the ceremony. And then I think they go behind a wall with the rest of the nuns. And I'm told that the parents are on the outside crying because they're never going to see their daughter again. And the nuns are on the inside smiling because they're completely free from the world, or something like that. So that's how it is for the Carmelite nuns. If a priest goes there to preach a retreat to them, he would be like me in front of the chapel or the conference room, whatever it is, but he wouldn't be able to see the nuns, and they wouldn't be able to see him, because they keep a grill between the outside world and the nuns. And that's a series of lattice work, wooden screens with a curtain in there. It's all very prescribed and regimented by the Carmelite order. But all of this to tell you what goes into becoming a second order religious. There's a lot of discipline there. And now I might be a little bit wrong on this, but I think I have some idea. A lot of us, we talk about the nuns, and as soon as we see a woman in habit, religious habit, we say that's a nun. But that's not exactly precise, because a lot of times the nuns that we see are not actually nuns, but only sisters, because they belong to the third order. And they are religious. So they're dressed just like nuns, and for all practical purposes, they are nuns, and we call them sister this and sister that, but they're not of the second order, they're of the third order. So someone as great as St. Rose of Lima of the 17th century, she was not a nun, she was a sister. She was a third order religious, you see. They can get very holy, these third order religious, wearing a habit and doing a lot of fasting and becoming saints. So much so that we don't even think of them as being not the second order, but they belong to even though they belong to the third order. So that gives you some idea. So today we're going to have two young ladies join the third order of the Society of St. Pius X. They won't be wearing habits, although they're very well dressed today. They won't be receiving a religious habit, but they will be expected to live a life which is more dedicated to God, more focused on our Divine Lord and our Blessed Mother, more given to meditation, at least one time a day, not necessarily 4 times a day, but 1 time a day. And then all the other basics that all of us Catholics are supposed to do. So, I make it sound like requirements and hard work, but actually it's the privilege and honor. They must pray the rosary every day. They must do spiritual reading every day. They must avoid the television. They cannot have a television in their house. Those used to be very frightening words up until about 10 or 20 years ago. Now I think most of us are thinking, I don't think I watch TV anyway. Everything is YouTube and internet and what else, Netflix. But back in the day, television was the big bugaboo. So these young ladies are expected to make the translation. If it's not television and it's something else, you have to avoid that. All right. They must go to Mass. Well, if this were a regular church, they must go to Mass every Sunday, and they're expected to be seen at Mass 1 or 2 other times during the week, if they can. And then they should make the retreat at least once every 2 years. So you can tell that these things I've described are like goals and purposes of all of us. I think all of us would want to do those things. But a lot of us will say, I really don't know how to meditate, so that's hard for me. And I am doing spiritual reading, but sometimes I miss. But I like to read about our Lord, the saints, the church, the history of the church. All of us want to do that and need to do that. I think all of us are here in this church because we do read and we do study things about the church. So we're already doing it. But these ladies are going to especially do it, and they bind themselves to do that. To the extent that if a person that belongs to the third order hasn't done his spiritual reading or her spiritual reading, they can confess that in confession, the sacrament of confession, and the priest will not say something like, well, that's not a sin, don't worry about it. If the person says, I'm a third order member, the priest will say, oh, they have to make spiritual reading, and they have to do meditation, so yeah, that's a sin. They missed it. They need to do that. That's the level they bring themselves to. So, and by the grace of God, this is not someone just saying, I want to be a third order member because I want to be more holy. No, it's, I would like to see if God is calling me to be a third order member so that I can do more for His church. There it is right there. And what ends up happening in our chapels, sometimes I call this our church. It's a very nice room, but I guess it's not exactly a church. What ends up happening in our chapels is these people that dedicate themselves to the third order start to become kind of like leaders. Maybe not very extroverted and speaking louder than everyone else, but everyone knows that there are some people in this chapel who are